Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to jump into this with you all. If you're a focused learner who's just looking to cut through all the noise, well, you've landed in the exact right place. Today, we're going to take the notoriously complex, super jargon-heavy world of compliance and risk management, and we're translating it into a clear, connected, and frankly, a pretty fascinating narrative. Okay, let's dive right into this. I want you to picture a scenario that is probably all too common. What actually happens when the critical rules of your entire business are locked away in totally disconnected spreadsheets? I mean, it's everyday chaos, right? You're tracking these massive company-wide risks in one file, you're emailing back and forth about some vendor audit in another, and then you're dumping control evidence into, I don't know, some random shared drive. It's incredibly fragmented, it's stressful, and honestly, it's literally impossible to manage at scale. So here's our roadmap for the Explainer today. First, we'll look at the digital control room. Then, understanding the basic logic. Third, a real-world scenario focusing on payroll. Fourth, connecting the enterprise ecosystem. And finally, avoiding common implementation pitfalls.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the digital control room.
We are officially leaving those fragmented, messy spreadsheets in the dust. Think of ServiceNow as your central digital control room for all things governance. Imagine having just one single connected workflow that brings together all your policies, your risks, the accountable owners, due dates, evidence, and the entire audit history. It literally connects all the dots for you, so you don't have to waste time manually chasing them down across the organization.
Moving right along to Section 2, understanding the basic logic.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we translate all that heavy technical jargon into plain, everyday English. Just look at how typical business questions map so elegantly right into the platform's features. If you're asking, hey, what rules do we actually have to follow? Well, ServiceNow answers that with authority documents and policies. You ask, how do we prove we're following them? That translates directly into controls and evidence. And what happens when things fail? The system just automatically handles that through issues and remediation tasks. It's incredibly straightforward. Let's rapidly break down a few of these critical terms, starting with entity. Honestly, an entity is just the specific business area, application, process, vendor, service, or department that you are assessing. This is absolutely vital because it's the glue. It connects those theoretical compliance rules to the real, tangible parts of your business that people are actually using every single day. Next up is control. So a control is the actual physical activity, process, or technical setting that helps you meet a requirement. Basically, think of it as the specific action that proves a rule is actually being followed. It is the crucial difference between a company just saying, oh yeah, we're secure, and actively proving, look, we require multi-factor authentication right here. And then we have the risk statement. This is just a really clear description of what could go wrong and, more importantly, why it matters. It essentially answers that critical, what is the absolute worst that could happen question. And trust me, it highlights exactly why your leadership team needs to care about this entire process.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds in a real-world scenario, payroll.
So let's apply these definitions we just talked about to a seriously high-stakes, everyday workplace scenario, the company payroll system. Now, as you know, this application contains highly sensitive employee salary data, tax records, and banking info. Because of that sensitivity, it absolutely requires strict access controls, robust privacy measures, and intense vendor requirements. I mean, the stakes here are through the roof. Here is how the setup timeline practically flows before we even do a single test. It starts out incredibly simply because the system record, well, it already exists in your CMDB. From there, the scope is confirmed, and the relevant policies, things like privacy and access rules, are mapped directly to it. Then, specific controls are defined, a concrete risk for unauthorized access is created, and finally, the assessment is launched. Notice how systematically every single piece just connects together like a puzzle.
But then, we reach the climax of our little story here. An assessment is completed, and boom, we get a glaring result, failed. It turns out, terminated user access was not removed within the required time frame. A critical control has completely failed, which essentially exposes the entire company to unauthorized access. Yikes, right?
Now, this is exactly where the platform's automatic resolution workflow kicks into gear. The issue is instantly and formally documented, and remediation is automatically assigned straight to the accountable owner. Once they do their part and fix it, a compliance tester steps in to objectively validate that fix. Upon that validation, the residual risk score automatically drops and the leadership dashboards update to reflect the improvement. The system is quite literally driving the fix from the moment of discovery all the way to final validation.
Which brings us nicely to Section 4, connecting the enterprise ecosystem.
And this brilliantly illustrates a key point. This digital control room does not operate in a vacuum. Traceability is where its true superpower lies. You see, ServiceNow connects directly to your CMDB for infrastructure, it links to ITSM for incidents, SecOps for vulnerabilities, ITAM for assets, and TPRM for vendor management. What does that actually mean? It means a botched IT change or a 60-day-old security vulnerability automatically impacts your real-time risk reporting. The whole shebang is seamlessly connected.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, avoiding common implementation pitfalls.
So now that you clearly see the vision, let's look at a few practical execution tips to ensure you actually succeed. First major pitfall, bad CMDB data. Your risk reporting becomes, frankly, completely unreliable if your application inventory is a total mess. The absolute crucial tip here is to maintain a squeaky clean inventory with perfectly accurate owners and relationships. Because at the end of the day, you simply cannot govern what you don't accurately track.
Moving to the next pitfall, creating way too many duplicate controls. If you do this, I promise you, you're going to bury your team under an avalanche of manual evidence requests. The pro tip? Use common controls. Map one incredibly strong, prioritized control to multiple regulatory requirements, and lean on automated indicators wherever you possibly can. It is a massive time saver.
And a third common pitfall is closing issues without any actual validation. Think about it. If an issue owner simply clicks closed and you just take their word for it without any solid proof, your entire governance framework is completely vulnerable. You should always require an evidence review by an objective compliance tester before you grant that final closure.
Because let's be honest with ourselves for a second here. Closing a massive compliance issue just because the system owner pinky swears it's fixed is exactly like grading your own homework. Obviously, you're going to give yourself an A, but it completely undermines the integrity of your entire governance program.
So, the crucial point is this, and I want to leave you with a final provocative question. Are you just manually tracking compliance, or are you continuously monitoring the actual truth? Moving away from a reactive, chaotic spreadsheet culture into a connected, automated environment is the ultimate goal here. Take a moment to think about exactly where your organization stands today and what your next step forward needs to be. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep on learning.